All right, so Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. There was a question that I was just asked, and I've said this very many times, and I think I'll say it again. I was asked about the Sufi groups, the different Sufi sects, and the different Sufi groups. I would like to say whether, I even had a video before on this, but I'll just make it brief. Uh, when we're speaking about Sufi sects, I definitely think that uh, the best of the groups that you can get some tarbiyah from are really the Sufis. Sufis have an outstanding relationship with one another, an outstanding tarbiyah. And in tarbiyah, I mean the discipline. In tarbiyah, you would see this discipline in teaching and training on dhikr, training on loving one another, training on doing certain, let's just call it self-cleansing and tazkiyah. They do an outstanding job. But the problem is many of those that are actually, let's say, adhering to these groups do actually use those groups or those cults as a way to perhaps control the masses, control their groups, and I would say use the religious appearance and abuse the groups that are coming in. Most of the people that would come into the Sufi world, they're very, I would say, um, they're very innocent and they are very simple. I don't mean by simple to mean necessarily, in a way that is making it seem like simple in money, but I would say many times very innocent, where many times they don't necessarily recognize the abuse and I would say the scamming that many of those people that may be in, let's say, in the position of probably being the leader in a Sufi sect or the leader in any religious sect, by the way. It's not just in a Sufi sect. You will find some people putting on, I would say, a religious garment, a religious appearance to hide behind those religious appearances, to hide behind, of course, a lot of the different things that they probably have ill motives and so forth. And that's the same thing when we're talking about some of the Sufi tariqas. For example, when we're talking about perhaps Naqshbandi tariqa or Sheikh Nazim or etc., or probably Shadhili, etc., I'll tell you that but when dealing with the people, you could be dealing with the nicest people, the most moral people, the most innocent people, the most spiritual people. I am not debating that whatsoever, but I would say many of those people, they basically become the easy target of those that want to abuse these people's innocence. That's what I would say. So it doesn't mean that every sheikh within this tariqah is going to be a scammer, but I will say many of the scammers do use Sufi tariqas as probably the easiest way to hide behind it. And here's the reason why. Sufi tariqas, it doesn't require a lot of ilm. It doesn't require hard work to actually be within that position. It just basically requires that you have high eloquence, you know how to talk, you know how to motivate people, you know how to use motivational speeches, and add a little bit of words here and there, probably about Allah, about the Prophet, etc. And guess what? The masses will not catch your ignorance. The masses generally are innocent, are simple, are uneducated about the deen, and they're not going to be picking up that, oh, this was actually a fabricated hadith. This was weak. This was actually bid'ah, etc. All of that, the masses are not going to pick it up. So it becomes an easy place. It's a lot easier to probably get in another group that requires a lot of ilm, that requires a lot of, let's all call it certification, and basically all that accreditation from other scholars. So it becomes an easier route for the scammers to basically get into Sufism, because one, you won't be discovered that easily, because the masses don't know much about the deen. Two, you can use your own, just very good wording and eloquence, and actually, fit into this group really easily. And you can go up the ranks. You could easily, claim or even, fit in as you are a person of spirit, high spirit, and all of that. And you don't necessarily need all that credibility and all that accreditation to prove that you really are fit for that position. So that becomes an easier place to fit in, like I said, for many of those scammers. But at the same time, I'll tell you, a lot of those that are part of these groups are not necessarily everybody. So, I know there are great people. I've had some of the most beautiful hearted friends are actually from the Naqshbandi Tariqa in particular, and from the followers of al-Nazim al-Haqqani. Even though I do recognize that some did abuse that position, meaning, like for example, some of those green brothers, they're called, some did abuse that, but that doesn't necessarily mean everyone. And some of the friends, like I said, the sisters that were part of those groups, the most beautiful sisters in heart, the most committed sisters in action, the most beautiful sisters in their relationship with dhikr, their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you really can sense that. And you would love that commitment. You would really love that commitment. But like I said, I would really recommend, adding on to that, the ilm. Having the ilm is not only your empowerment to recognizing whether it's a scamming, or whether it's the innovation, or whether it's the misinterpretation of religion, or even the manipulation that some might use. But I would say having the ilm is key to understanding the religion for yourself and your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's also many times, I would say, we would be focusing on ilm that very often, I'll tell you, we do miss in those groups that focus so much on ilm, that tarbiyah that you would find in the Sufi groups. There would be other groups, without naming names, that would be focusing so much on talab al-ilm and seeking ilm and recognizing the areas of bid'ah, and then the whole practice of sunnah is forgotten, to be honest. The whole practice of sunnah, the whole practice of dhikr, the whole practice of having a wird to read, what to read, how to do qiyam al-layl, how to connect to qiyam al-layl, the importance of qiyam al-layl, the importance of having ikhlas al-niyyah, the importance of al-awrad, al-azkar, etc. They'll learn about it, but the discipline to do it, the discipline to relate to it, I don't think anybody matches the Sufis in that training. And I think many times you would see in the different Muslim groups, this one is attacking that one, and that one is attacking this one, and it becomes really an area where we don't recognize that we have done everything in such a way that we're just putting our ego and putting our own self-centricity over recognizing our own shortcomings, and recognizing how we can improve and how we can benefit from one another. That's in short, in what I will say. So what can we do? I would say learn from the adab and the tarbiyah of Sufis. And I would say learn from the activism of Ikhwan. And I would say learn from the ilm of Salafis. That's in general. Learn from the ilm of Salafis, from the adab of Sufis and the tarbiyah, and from the activism of Ikhwan. And that, inshallah, will get you in that area, inshallah, where you will learn how to learn from one another, embrace one another, and recognize that we need to improve by letting ourselves mirror one another and actually bring the best of us. Okay, I hope I answered that one in regards to Sufis. Last time, we actually ended up talking about a number of different topics, to be honest. We were at لكل نبأ مستقر وسوف تعلمون, and we talked about لكل نبأ مستقر. We talked about ruqya, because Thalabi had mentioned that it is a ruqya. We also talked about لكل نبأ مستقر. Is this talking about generally every single information that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent? Meaning, is this naba really referring, let's actually do that, right? Let's do it right there. Is this naba really referring to il-ayat, meaning the Quran itself? Or is this naba referring to the whole concepts, all of the concepts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically sent, or the stories that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent as an example? So we talked about these two interpretations, and we went in details with that. We also talked about il-mansukh and what is abrogated, and we went in details about some of those ayat that we were told that they were abrogated, and why it was said it was abrogated. And we said a lot of it in order to actually consider that something is abrogated, you basically have to know the history of what was revealed first and what was revealed after. Because you cannot say that something canceled out the practice or the application of one unless you would know which one came first and which one came later. Okay, because abrogation only happens in legislature and not in information. The information stays the same. Okay, so we can never have an ayah that is talking about Prophet Musa alayhi salam and say, oh, this one actually got abrogated by another ayah in Surah Taha, for example, that's talking about Prophet Musa. No, that's an information. Information stays as information. It doesn't change. And the application in what to do in terms of practice, the legislature, etc., that can get abrogated, meaning that the legislature might later, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, well, there's no abrogation now, but that was during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, because of the gradual process of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is revealing the ayat until the people are capable of growing into that high level, or at least into that final stage of what the ayat were going to be revealed in. That application was basically going through that gradual process. Within this gradual process, some ayat in legislature, they were basically, in the beginning it was revealed in a certain way, and later on it was basically revealed in a different order. Okay, that's what abrogation basically is. Okay, وَإِذَا رَأَيْتَ, we're still doing the Tafseer Surah al-Qurtubi, by the way. Tafseer Surah al-Qurtubi. Oh dear. Tafseer Surah al-An'am and going through Surah al-Qurtubi. Oh, la ilaha illallah. Basically, Tafseer al-Qurtubi. Sorry about that. Okay, let me just remove this red line right there, because we're going to be doing a lot of lines. Okay, let's do it right there. وَإِذَا رَأَيْتَ الَّذِينَ يَخُوضُونَ فِي آيَاتِنَا, this one, now we're still in تفسير القرطبي. وَإِذَا رَأَيْتَ الَّذِينَ يَخُوضُونَ فِي آيَاتِنَا فَأَعْرِضْ عَنْهُمْ حَتَّى يَخُوضُوا فِي حَدِيثٍ غَيْرِهِ. So when you look at وَإِذَا رَأَيْتَ الَّذِينَ يَخُوضُونَ, I guess the word, generally it means if you see those engage. I'm going to use the word engage in our verses But of course, even that is actually not a complete accurate translation, because this isn't talking about engaging just in the verses, but this is actually going a little farther. And we're going to see what التكذيب really means and what يخوضون actually means. So يخوضون في آياتنا, in general, it's actually talking about those that would deny or reject or even mock the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this would then be a general ayah, those that would mock, deny, or even object to the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that this is what it's referring to. But of course, is this the only thing that al-Qurtubi wanted to talk about? Let's go further. And here he says that the discourse is actually generally just it's more to the Prophet ﷺ. And some scholars actually said that no, it's not to the Prophet ﷺ alone, but it actually would be including the believers, and therefore this would be not exclusive to the Prophet ﷺ, because generally there is a general rule. We always say this one, al-ibra بعموم اللفظ لا بخصوص السبب. Remember that one? العبرة بعموم اللفظ لا بخصوص السبب. So what does that mean? So العبرة بعموم اللفظ لا بخصوص السبب would basically mean that the theme is going to be in the wording itself and not necessarily in the quote itself and the reason behind the quote. So we're looking at what? We're looking at the theme being in general, targeting and basically giving the lessons to the believers, and not even though the ayah was that was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, disciplining the Prophet ﷺ, okay, but that is not exclusive to the Prophet ﷺ, and therefore the believers, meaning you and I, inshallah, basically are included in this discipline. Now, this is extremely important. When we're speaking about discipline, we're speaking about tarbiyah. We're speaking about adab. Okay, when we're speaking about all of those tarbiyah and adab, all of that, when we speak of tarbiyah and adab, we're actually talking about a type of direction, instruction. There has to be a direction and an instruction. The direction is basically giving us the keys to how we're going to basically take the path. So we're talking about general concepts. We're talking about general rules. We're talking about, this is the direction. The instruction, that's more requiring that tarbiyah. Okay, so the adab is more of giving us within this direction. Tarbiyah is more of instruction. Okay, so when we look at that, you could say that in the Quran, some of it was giving us instruction and some of it was giving us direction. The directions are more of legal maxims. It's telling us, well, this is what you need to do. Here's the direction. This is what this is the concept that you should be carrying. This is how you understand it, etc. التربية, okay, التربية would be, no, are you following this? This is what you should be doing during the morning. Did you do it? This is what you need to do in relationship with the different people around you, whether believers, not believers, whatever it is. This is what you need to do in terms of a specific instruction. Okay, so when we look at instruction and direction, and by the way, even when you look at the scholars, historically speaking, there were some scholars in tarbiyah and other scholars in that related to adab and tazkiyah, and those were two different groups. So the scholars in tazkiyah were different than the scholars in tarbiyah. Okay, the most important scholar in tazkiyah, you would talk about perhaps al-Ghazali, you would talk about Ibn al-Jawzi, you would talk about basically, those scholars that wrote on tazkiyah and wrote about how we're supposed to be keeping our tongues basically away from saying haram, how we're supposed to avoid hasad. So in other words, it's disciplining our hearts to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's going to be tazkiyah, okay? Disciplining our hearts to basically connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all of that. A tarbiyah is different because a tarbiyah is putting you on a structure. Is putting you on a structure, how you basically organize your time, how you relate with the people around you, how you relate with probably cleaning yourself, maybe cleaning your room, maybe putting a structure in what you're doing, how you're basically putting in, let's say, a certain dynamic within your life, how you're organizing your time. That's going to be more of tarbiyah. And there were different teachers for that. So the scholar of tarbiyah, the most important scholar for tarbiyah and who wrote about tarbiyah is Ibn Jama'ah. Ibn Jama'ah, he was considered as probably the leading scholar to write about tarbiyah, and his books on tarbiyah were considered probably the most important books. And if you were to look at the tarbiyah books, he would talk about the importance of direction and instruction and the difference between the two. There's one thing that's quite interesting that he says, for boys, you mainly raise boys in direction, but girls in instruction. It's kind of, strange of him to actually say that. But now that I'm a mother and my kids being teenagers, I could see where and how those differences are actually there, direction and instruction. But of course, that doesn't mean everybody, because, kids are not born with instruction manuals, but at the end, the difference is that for the direction, what you are trying to make is a leader. You're trying to make a leader. That's why you give them direction on how to do things. And it's quite interesting that studies are actually talking about boys' brains being more pragmatic and girls' brains being more emotional. I used to think that that was misogynist to think, but it turned out that I was very wrong, and that's actually what science is showing us, that we're more geared and wired towards emotion, more geared and wired towards a number of different hormones. I was reading yesterday this very interesting that I never ever thought that was actually true. It was actually talking about that even the milk that the mother, a pregnant woman, so pregnant woman A and pregnant woman B. Pregnant woman A had a baby boy. Pregnant woman B had a baby girl. The type of nutrients that the mother that had a baby boy are actually more than the nutrients that the woman that had the baby girl. The protein and a number of different things, but there are certain nutrients that girls will have in their milk, that like calcium and a couple other things, but in general, the boys actually will, their milk is different than the milk that girls will get. In fact, their milk has more. I'm just wondering, like, للذكر مثل حظ الأنثيين, even in milk. It's quite interesting, but quite interesting that even when it comes to what they will be given in terms of the share of milk and nutrients and all of that, it's giving them a certain direction. It's building a certain brain. It's building a certain body that's different. And yes, so subhanallah, you're seeing this, yet you will still have those LGBTQ actually, debating on whether all of that all of that is actually just a social structure that, or a social thing that we had created or not, the male female part. And it's like, well, you're actually male or female to the bone, to your DNA. There's nothing that you could deny about that. But they managed to manipulate many people, because the same thing, just like when I was talking about the Sufis, how they managed to manipulate a lot of the people and get around with a lot of things using a religious appearance. That's the same thing. You will find, even within outside the world of religious groups, you will find certain scientists that will, or even people that will put on a scientist appearance and put in words that may seem like they're educational, studies say, and etc., and actually put on a scientist appearance or a study or an academic appearance to basically manipulate the masses. That's how the evolution theory also made its way. That's how a lot of the different groups that basically would come in, perhaps departments, the Department of Psychology, Department of Sociology, Gender Studies, Women's Studies, all of that, they basically are there exactly the same way that you would find certain groups that manage to basically get into that pedagogy, get into the system of religion to manipulate and use that to get their agendas and their ideologies and their scamming, basically through that circle. You'll find the exact same thing. Certain ideologies, certain isms will use the Department of Psychology, the Department of Feminist Studies, the Department of Sociology, Anthropology, etc., and without you realizing, it is presented like it's a scientific study, or it's this and that, and then yes, you will see the same thing, that hey, you will find that such manipulation does happen. Let's see. The sister said, subhanAllah, my mom noticed the difference in density between the expressed milk I produced for my daughter versus the milk with my sister expressed for her son at the same time. And a few weeks later, we came across a video talking about it. SubhanAllah, it's so interesting. SubhanAllah, I mean, but here's the thing, maybe someone might actually say there's the hinge milk and then there's the fore milk. So, that's one side, the hinge milk and the fore milk, because when the baby is young, the fore milk basically, it's the density is different because the baby is not yet ready to take in that protein. But that's one other thing. But still, I mean, yeah, what you just at least that anecdotal side of it is definitely, subhanAllah, something interesting to actually notice. Good job, Mom. Okay, let's continue right there. When you look at, what was I saying? Oh, okay. So here Qurtubi said, وَهُوَ الصحيح. What is وَهُوَ الصحيح? That المؤمنين داخلون في الخطاب معه. That the general masses of the Muslim nation, basically the mu'mineen, are part of are part and basically included in this training, in this tarbiyah, in this adab. إذا رأيت الذين يخوضون في آياتنا فأعرض عنهم. This is the tarbiyah, this is the adab. So the adab that was given to the Prophet ﷺ is basically the adab and the tarbiyah that we as general Muslims must also adopt in order to basically go up in the rank of our iman. That's that area. I know I kind of got off with the tarbiyah and adab, but I thought it was important to just say, so is this adab or tarbiyah? This is more of tarbiyah. إذا رأيت الذين يخوضون في آياتنا, this is tarbiyah. It's giving you that tarbiyah, how to relate with the people around you and what you should be doing in terms of such a relationship. And like I said, in terms of the direction being more to boys and the tarbiyah or the instruction being more to girls. SubhanAllah, I think we had been told that was too traditional, that was too cultural, but we could see that subhanAllah, scholars before, and I think we really need to learn more about the way that our teachers, at least before. I'm talking about the tarbiyah and like Ibn Jama'ah. I think we need to revive those studies. And they definitely had a lot of wisdom. But even though at the time they didn't have the scientific research to differentiate between, let's say, the male brain and the female brain and all of that, they didn't have that research to differentiate between the two. But they definitely recognized their role. They were using their wisdom, their experience, their experiment, their own personal experiment to recognize the difference between the two, and where we're supposed to be basically embedding tarbiyah and that adab as well, and the tarbiyah and the adab and the tazkiyah and all of that. Every Muslim needs tazkiyah, okay? And every person needs tarbiyah and adab. But how we as parents, or how we as Muslims in general, how we do it to ourselves, that is something that I would definitely say the Sufis and the Sufi shuyukh are definitely miles and miles farther than a lot of the Muslim schools. They're farther away from many Muslim schools. I'll just use the word schools rather than say, organizations. I'll just use the word schools out of respect right now. Okay. And I will say miles away, because the teacher, one thing you would notice is that the teacher has a certain position. The teacher is respected. The teacher, and the relationship between the teacher and the student, who they would call in murid. One thing is that, there's, the pros and the cons to it. One thing is that the students usually are simple in the Sufi tariqah, and that's why they would look up to the teacher, because they acknowledge that they don't have much help, okay? And therefore, they don't necessarily enter that circle to criticize and be critical of what is being said. They're looking for direction. They're looking for direction. They come in with an open heart, searching for direction. Okay, that's that thing. Now, how is this used? That's a different story. How do others or some people may abuse it? That's a different story. But I'm just letting you know that, some people do have, I would say, great ilm, and even are part of those groups. In fact, I would say things like our scholars like al-Bugha, and a lot of those scholars even are great scholars in hadith, by the way, scholars in hadith that were not given the appreciation that they deserve, were actually Sufis. So I don't want you to think that all Sufis lack ilm. That's not actually true. Al-Azhar is generally part of that. And you had a lot of great Syrian scholars that are actually Sufi as well, and scholars in hadith as well. So let's not think that hadith science is exclusive to another group, but no, they had some contribution, great contribution as well. Okay. Now, at the same time, when we're speaking about that tarbiyah that comes in, giving that appreciation to the teacher, and then later on, of course, learning how to take in the instruction, how to take in that tarbiyah, how to take in that discipline, how to be committed. The other thing that really helps with that tarbiyah is the group. There's a group that supports your path in trying to become better. And that's one thing you would find that group in, let's say, the Sufi tariqah, specifically Tablighi. You would find this group, they're eating together, they're learning together, they're participating in probably going to homeless shelters together, they're probably engaging in a lot of community service, whether it's cleaning the streets or probably helping in senior homes, etc. All of that tarbiyah you would actually find in Sufi groups. You wouldn't find the same in other groups, to be honest. You would not find the same in other groups. The other groups are either focused on studying politics and the conspiracies that are happening, or another group that's probably just focused on talab al-ilm and talab al-ilm plus talab al-ilm. But community service, that's a hands-on. This is a hands-on, and that's that tarbiyah. That's that tarbiyah. And when we speak about, for example, making camps for, let's say, children or even adults, it's very important to include and embed with that tarbiyah some time to probably clean the streets, some time to clean your room, some time to clean your probably in volunteer in senior homes, volunteer in shelters, etc. All of that, because it's a hands-on, it creates within you the lesson to be humble, because you will never actually be a talib ilm. You will never live up to al-ubudiyya lillah if you still have arrogance even on people. That arrogance is the killer, the number one killer for a person's iman. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said that any person that has an iota, لا يدخل الجنة من كان في قلبه مثقال ذرة من كبر. Anybody that has an iota, the smallest atom of arrogance and pride, they would never enter Jannah. Why? Because al-kibriya, pride, is only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But once a person has this kibriya, and here's one thing, the other groups you will find kibriya. They might excel, maybe they have their intelligence, somebody might be smarter, somebody might be, I guess, capable of surpassing their peers in probably memorizing hadith, memorizing Quran, in probably research, etc. Some might actually excel or even be better at their competition because they probably have better potentials and not necessarily always better dedication. Okay. And then that competition, yes, certainly you could see better ilm, etc. But then is their heart necessarily free of that hasad, free of that envy, free of that kibriya? That's something that definitely many would need to work on. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us free of kibriya and make us free of envy and make us of those that would have the best of tarbiyah, the best of tazkiyah, and the best of adab. Okay, let's continue with that one. And of course, when فَإِنَّ الْعِلَّةَ سَمَاعَ الْخَوْضِ فِي آيَاتِ اللَّهِ. So what is the evidence? And I want you to look at this one. Al-Qurtubi said, and he was saying that what is actually more accurate is that the discourse in this ayah is directed, I want you to look at the word directed, is directed at the believers and directed at the Prophet ﷺ in the same way, and is not necessarily directed just as the Prophet ﷺ and for us to just get a general inspiration. So when you look at that, and Al-Qurtubi was saying, and this is actually what's more preponderant or what's actually right. Why did he say that? I want you to look at this one. فَإِنَّ الْعِلَّةَ. I want you to look at the word al-illah. He said that the reason behind that, the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was ordering in this ayah to stay away, or at least if you were to see those that would engage in the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, engage, we're talking about negative engagement. We're not talking about positive engagement. We're talking about negative engagement, whether mockery, objection, or perhaps maybe denial, etc. Those are the people that you want to stay away from. So then in that situation, that's al-illah. What is the word al-illah? Al-illah is a key word in studying something called usul al-fiqh. Okay, what is al-illah? Al-illah is basically the reasoning behind something, the actual reasoning. The reasoning can be something that is, let's say, mentioned in the text, and the reasoning can be something we could see in the context. Okay, so that's different than al-hikmah. Okay, let me write these two words down. Al-hikmah, okay, let's see, right there. I'm going to write that down. We've got al-hikmah and we've got al-illah. Okay, al-hikmah is probably the wisdom behind something. But here's the thing. الحكمة غير منضبطة. العلة منضبطة. What's the difference? الحكمة, you don't have a specific border within it. So, for example, somebody might actually say, hey, just like earlier we were talking about the milk and how the mother's milk for a baby boy is different than the milk that a mother baby girl's milk and etc. All of that, but that's not al-illah. So we can't use that as evidence to make rulings based on that, because that's not the reason. We can use that as a wisdom, as an inspiration to something, but we can never use that as an evidence to prove a certain ruling. Okay, we can use that as an inspiration. Let's talk about something that is more practical. Let's just say we look at hijab, okay? And we would say, well, hijab, it was something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, ذَلِكَ أَدْنَىٰ أَن يُعْرَفْنَ فَلَا يُؤْذَيْنَ. The reason, the hikmah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned, that this is for them to be known for their bashfulness, and that way they won't be harmed. But let's say that right now, hey, we've got police all around, the women can actually call 911, and therefore they're protected. Unlike before, that they probably needed more personal protection, but right now, hey, the community is basically protecting the women. Therefore, can we say that hijab right now is not mandatory because, hey, the protection and that area of, let's say, insecurity like before is not there? We'll say, no, you confused al-illah and al-hikmah. How? Where? So al-hikmah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ذَلِكَ أَدْنَىٰ أَن يُعْرَفْنَ فَلَا يُؤْذَيْنَ, that was al-hikmah. But al-illah is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the reason why al-hijab, Ya ayyuhan nabi, it was directly telling him, this is what you need to instruct your women, your believing women, your wives, your daughters, the believing women, to basically do that. That was al-illah. Al-illah is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned the reason that this is a religious order. This is a divine order. Okay. So even if the circumstances might change, that does not necessarily make hijab as an extra thing or a sunnah or something that we don't necessarily have to do because the circumstances change. Okay, or if, let's just assume, even though circumstances didn't change, it's really the same, but because at the end, men are men, and they're definitely going to see their place of pleasure in women, but, let's just follow along for the sake of the argument, okay? Okay, just follow for the sake of the argument, okay? So when we're talking about al-illah and al-hikmah, al-illah can either be something that you could find in the text, or the al-illah can be within the context. But this is a very intricate science. It's called usul al-fiqh, and they study in depth al-illah and al-qiyas, and they'll go for al-fara', and they'll go into all of that. That's a complete science on its own, and it's something that really uses a lot of lugha Arabiya. And most of the times when people think that they could just talk about the concept, okay, in a reductionist way, and think of, I could use this concept, I don't need lugha Arabiya, etc., we'll say, well, wait a minute, usul al-fiqh is actually based on lugha Arabiya. All the different things and that you would see in lugha Arabiya, the grammar, etc., all of that is actually the core of understanding all the different differences between wisdom, the reasoning. Why did we say this was a wisdom? Why did we say this was a reasoning? How do we prove that this is not a reason, but this is a hikmah, etc.? Hikmah can be just a general thing. A general thing is an inspiration that we could see what an interesting hikmah. We saw scientific studies that said this and this. Interesting, very interesting. But we would not use hikmah as let's say that area that we would depend on for a specific ruling. The ruling is related to text and not al-hikmah, because al-hikmah can change with time in how we see things. That's a wisdom. But al-illah, no, the reason why alcohol is haram is because it leads to intoxication. Okay, if it leads to intoxication, then therefore anything that leads to intoxication is going to be haram. That's a illah. That's the reason behind it. And therefore, anything that follows along with that reason is going to take the same ruling. Okay? Anyhow, so when you look at this ayah, what he was trying to say, he said, well, the reason for that is basically hearing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being mocked at, being objected, being denied. In other words, to honor the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to take a stance. You see somebody mocking the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see somebody mocking the Islamic tarbiyah, mocking, let's say, Islam, mocking the rulings, etc. Then in that situation, you have to take a serious stance, and either you basically find yourself a different corner, separate yourself, or you stand up and actually defend, let's say, whether it's hijab or whether it's salah or whether it's the mu'mineen, even the mu'mineen. Yes, even the mu'mineen. All right, even the mu'mineen. You're defending the mu'mineen, you're defending Quran, you're defending the different practices of Islam, etc. All of that, that's part of وَإِذَا رَأَيْتَ الَّذِينَ يَخُوضُونَ فِي آيَاتِنَا فَأَعْرِضْ عَنْهُمْ. Unless you're capable of standing in objection, of standing in basically in debate or in support, or basically you're taking the time to educate and basically change these people from speaking about Islam to probably you bring it to their attention that what they're saying is wrong. But here's one thing. When you see وَإِذَا رَأَيْتَ الَّذِينَ يَخُوضُونَ فِي آيَاتِنَا, in the beginning, and this is when we're talking about friends, okay? In the beginning, you might say, well, I was, this friend, we're basically going to school together. I like their attitude. I love their charisma, all of that. And we're engaging. Sometimes this friend X might actually talk about things in mockery of the religion. And I will basically object. And here's what I'll say, blah, 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 all of that. Okay. Now, here's one thing. In the beginning, if you take this person as a friend, okay, in the beginning, you might notice, and especially in the girls' world, okay, in the beginning, you might object and they'll probably recognize that they shouldn't be speaking too directly about their objection to your lifestyle, to your religion. So they'll speak about it in small portions. And that's Shaitan's way. They'll speak about it in small portions or sometimes hinted to you. And then little by little, you become numb to their objection, to their mockery. And then you will probably be not realizing that you're actually using the same rhetoric, the same ideas, and that you become a part of them. Okay. And this is what I had seen as a chaplain, that in the beginning, they're probably going to class together. They're talking about different subjects. In the beginning, they're objecting, and then little by little, they'll land on a lot of things that they might actually agree on. And it's either A or B is going to overcome in their personality. A or B is probably going to be the one to have the greater influence on the other person. Usually, from what I had noticed, the greater influence would be the one that has the charisma, the power, etc. But in many times, it's basically the group, the larger group. So if you would say, let's say, 7 people, okay, 7 people are together and they have a certain idea, but then person, let's say A, comes in and basically holds a conversation, and in the beginning person A is feeling isolated, so they won't straightforward basically speak about their objection to all the 7 people. So they'll basically be silent about it, and they won't necessarily stand up, because if they were to stand and object to them, they'll feel isolated. So they'll just stay quiet about it and probably give a smile here and there to what is being said. And little by little, they will feel that in order for me to get accepted, to me being embraced, endorsed, and especially in the girls' world, that I'll have to basically embrace that idea. Little by little, they'll basically include them, and they just fit in with that group. They're looking for a way to fit in, a way to be accepted, a way to be endorsed, appreciated. So they'll basically find this group that's probably complimenting on their clothes, complimenting on their diet, complimenting on their appearance, complimenting on their intelligence, complimenting on their whatever they're doing. And then it becomes, yes, let's fit in, because they're the ones that are complimenting me. They're the ones that are making me feel good about myself. And then they would basically not recognize, but they had just changed. The people around them, their family, their parents might actually say, hey, listen, you had changed, but they will feel that, no, these are the people that made me feel good about myself. You as a family, you're just continuously criticizing me. You're being critical of my looks, critical of my room, critical of my appearance, critical of my thinking. You're not my friends. They are my friends. So that's how the friends come in, as this power that's influencing the younger generation, and then the parents become the enemies, because to them, you're just being critical of me all the time and not making me feel good about myself. Ustaza Umayya, you wanted to say something here.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. You mean by فأعرض عنهم, do you mean that to leave the place or make myself busy with the other group, same majlis?
So within this, when we're talking about, let's actually go right there, because to answer your question, he continues to actually explain. It was said that it was talking about the Prophet ﷺ, because here's that context, okay? The context to answer your question, because the Prophet ﷺ, the disbelievers, remember the Prophet ﷺ was considered a person of importance, at least within the society at the time. Even before Islam, he was amongst the noble people. Okay, so even before Islam, he was seen as not any random person, but a person that belonged and adhered to a certain noble tribe. So he wasn't just any random person. So if the Prophet ﷺ would avoid or even get out of their group and their majlis, basically, they would feel offended. Okay, they would feel offended. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling the Prophet ﷺ to use this position, basically to let that power, that charisma of his, be also, let's call it, a social pressure to make sure that they would recognize their border and recognize how they engage with the Prophet ﷺ or with Islam. In other words, it was really using more of a social pressure to use that position to make sure that they recognize their distance and how they should not be mocking the religion, and that they should basically respect the religion. And that's the same thing when we look at this ayah, for example. There's a difference between, let's say, a professor speaking in let's say in a lecture room, and the position that they carry to probably silence a certain student or probably say a certain thing, and that charisma that a professor might hold in the stance, for example, that they might actually, the position, the stance, the power that they might actually hold in silencing a student or probably making a statement or etc. is completely different than a student. A student basically comes in, and if they were to leave and exit perhaps the lecture room, and the professor was mocking the religion or mocking religious people, etc., and if the student is going to be leaving that lecture room, one, they might actually be considered as they left, and might actually jeopardize their credits, that you were out for this amount of time, you were not part of the class, therefore even the questions that were answered on the test, you didn't enter it based on the teacher's terms, and therefore you might lose your credit, etc. So of course, if I'm going to see those that probably could be a professor, am I going to exit the lecture room? You see what I'm saying? Am I going to exit the lecture room and probably jeopardize and risk my grades and risk probably that class, or what am I going to do? And that's that area. And I'll tell you, with my experience, you'll have different people. In the beginning, you'll have students that will stand up and actually challenge the professor and say, hey, you said this about the religion, here's the defense, or here's the response. That's the person that usually you'll have people, at least in the beginning, wanting to object and will basically have the defense and stand up, but then the professors using their position to silence you, to mock you, to corner you with questions and not give you the time to answer. That's when, of course, their confidence, the students' confidence, becomes less and less to challenge the professors. And then it becomes, they become the upper hand. They become the power. They become the ones, by the time they graduate, the students graduate, by that time they had already been silenced so many times, and then this indoctrination basically this indoctrination had overcome their own confidence and even their own ilm to defend their points. Okay, that's number one. Then you have other people that would use that, even if they're students, but they will use their power, even if it means risking my grades, no matter what, I'm going to continue and actually prove the professor wrong. And I've had students that literally challenge their professors, not very many, but at the end, they basically managed to even lead the professors to become Muslim. That's not very many, that's very few. But there are those students that, mashallah, they've got the ilm, they've got the charisma, they've got the argument, the hujjah. They know how to, present Islam, and they know how to bring about the defense, and they know how to do their research. They know how to do their research to also not only research the Islamic argument, but also research the other opponent, basically in this situation, for example, the professor, and to actually prove the flaws within that professor. And, not very many are capable of doing that. And, that's something to definitely applaud for those that, mashallah, we're actually seeing a rise in that number of those students that are capable of having that determination, having that, and actually challenging that, and not necessarily succumbing to that situation and feeling that, no, I'm gonna stay quiet, I don't want to stand out, and etc. Because you either are a leader or you're a follower. Within that classroom, you're either a leader or you're a follower. And those that choose to, I just want to get my credits and just graduate. I don't want to do any debating. I don't want to do any of that. Then you become someone else's practice, basically. Without you realizing, you will be indoctrinated. With you're quiet about it, then where's your passion? Is your passion a degree, or is your passion the religion? And that's that area that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching the Prophet that your passion to the faith should be basically the number one, and use your own social power, your own argument, all of that to defend basically the religion. Okay, let's see. And he said, or at least the scholars that said that this was directed at the believers, they said, well, the believers didn't have this social power or the social position, and therefore it was more directed at the Prophet ﷺ, and that was in order to discipline the disbelievers and to basically put an end to their mockery. But what the question is, what is al-khawd? When you look at what إِذَا رَأَيْتَ الَّذِينَ يَخُوضُونَ, why didn't it say, for example, those that talked about the religion? يَتَحَدَّثُونَ, for example. Or maybe say, maybe يستهزئون, or etc. But it said يخوضون, and that's a very specific word. Let's just see right here and look at the word يخوضون and what it means. He said الخوض, the word خاض, is originally to actually mean to shake in water, just plain water. So you're shaking water. That's basically what al-khawd really that, let's say, the etymology of it. The etymology is relating anything that you are mixing with water or you're shaking water. That's basically what al-khawd really means. So if that's what it means, to put something in water or probably shake something with water, then how do we relate to that? So he was basically saying, well, this is bringing in this metaphor in kind of like a figurative thing, that just as this water is shaken, and this water is shaken in the same way that when the conversations are carried out, when these conversations, they kind of like get into this engagement where it's kind of like a wave and a shake, and without us realizing, these ideas, they start creating a set of wave of ideas, a wave and a shake of basically perceptions that will start either one, they're not going to stay in their area, but they will either influence you or you're going to be influencing them. So that's that il-khawd. That's that il-khawd. It's either going to be, of course, you mix anything with water, what happens? It basically starts moving. It creates some kind of a movement, it creates some kind of a wave, etc. It creates some shaking in there, and that's basically al-khawd. So he said what this ayah was bringing in, it's comparing the the visual side of how we see things moving, shaking, and basically bringing in this type of wave, to really see something from visual to seeing and understanding how things happen in practice. Okay, and this is very common in the Quran. We use a specific word, even though it is used in situations like water, like this one, or probably that is used in the word light, for example, even though we would think of something that is a materialistic example, but then it was really referring to something that is not necessarily of a materialistic example as much as it is to just help you visualize what really happens in those conversations, what really happens in those situations, etc. Okay, and certainly whether we're mixing something or whether we're basically bringing in a wave, all of that, that's basically the same, that conversations basically have an impact And therefore, with that, once you recognize the impact it has on the society, it has on you and I, then in that situation, you recognize that there are certain areas you need to avoid. And I don't mean by just only certain areas, but sometimes also certain fields. And I had seen that. I know, that the chaplain side is still in me. At least working at a university, I had seen certain fields containing more fitna than other fields. And I would say, see this all the time. In certain fields, they could talk and I was like, okay, you're part of this department, right? Yes, I'm part of this department. And you could say that certain professors, and the way that certain professors are recruited, based on an agenda that department basically carries. So I'll give you an example. The people, let's say, the department, let's say it that way, department is needing another professor to basically teach this subject, okay? And then we'll have probably maybe 8 professors, okay? 8 professors with 8 different backgrounds, or at least within that field, okay, apply. Well, then we'll interview the 8 people that applied. But one thing is that we're looking for a person that carries our own agenda, that carries our own ideas. So for example, the university was always looking for, because they had a grant by the LGBT, they were always looking for someone that is inclusive to people with different, they would call it sexual orientation, okay? So that's what they would use. And then therefore they would interview A, B, C, all the different 8 people. And always the question, how would you relate? What is your stance on the LGBT? What is your stance on people this? And they'll basically look for people that carry their perspective, their ideas, their stance, and etc. And without you realizing, you have a whole society, you have a whole department that basically agrees with one another on how and what vision they basically would want that department to go based on, and the pedagogy and all of that. And therefore the lectures would include a certain set of ideas, a certain set of stances and etc., because hey, someone else just gave a grant that you have to include these ideas as part of the curriculum. And without you realizing, all the students that would come to you, Muslim students would come to you from that department. You're like, yep, I know that department is basically going that direction. This department is going that direction, etc. Okay. Let's see right here. He said that روى شبل عن أبي نجيح عن مجاهد وإذا رأيت الذين يخوضون في آياتنا, in regards to this ayah, he said those are the people that would mock the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically prevented him or prohibited him to sit with these people because basically of what they're doing, unless he would forget. But if you remember that these people are mocking the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or mocking Islam, etc., then in that situation you basically have to take a stance if they were to say anything against the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, let's see another thing. He said, number 2, remember you had 3 points to say in regards to this ayah. Am I right? I remember you had 2 points or 3 points. You didn't say. Okay, well, I thought it was 3. Okay, let's see. He said in this ayah there is an objection to those from the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on those that had claimed from the scholars that أن الأئمة الذين هم حجج وأتباعهم لهم أن يخالطوا الفاسقين ويصوبوا آرائهم تقية. Okay, well, what is the debate?
he said, in this area, there is an objection for those that would claim from the scholars that they basically have an evidence to engage with al-fasiqeen just in order to correct their ideas. Wait a minute, what does that mean? So let's say you had a group of 8 guys or 8 girls, okay? And these 8 girls, you know that they were planning to go to, let's say, the movies and watch video that you know is rated R and is not appropriate, carrying a lot of inappropriate scenes. So you know that that's what they were going to do. But then you thought, if I were to go with them, maybe I would have the power to possibly convince them not to watch the movie and perhaps instead go to a restaurant and just have a good time at a restaurant, for example. Okay. Now, here's the thing. Some scholars actually said, well, if you have the ability to go with them and possibly protect them from doing something major haram, then yes, that would probably be something that you would be rewarded for. The other scholars, they said no, because it's jeopardizing your faith. And this ayah was their evidence. They said, well, here's our evidence. If you know that someone is going to engage in haram, and they're a group of people, or let's say even if it was one person, you preserve yourself away from hellfire, and your preservation and preserving yourself from hellfire is your number one priority. And going with the other people, hey, I tried to convince them that watching this movie was a bad idea. It was haram. You can have fun, but do halal fun and not haram fun, etc. And there are different ways of having fun in a halal way, etc. I tried to do that. Okay. But then they insisted, should I go with them to continue this type of advice, or should I not continue? So the scholars that supported, just go with them, but don't go to the movie, but just go, and possibly you can tell them, even if it was the last minute, to probably get them out of doing that haram thing, let's say, okay? The other scholars, they said, no, you know that was their plan. You want to preserve your deen and make sure that you don't even relate to that group in the beginning. This group, isolate yourself from them, because if you don't isolate yourself from them, they're going to have that influence on you without you realizing. And this is extremely important to keep in mind, especially when we're speaking about something. I want something practical, something that we could relate to. Okay, we're not here talking about just generalizations, but we're speaking about something that is relatable to our life. So can we relate with al-fasiqeen, those that are not taking the religion seriously, and actually say, well, I'm trying to do da'wah to them? Should I do that? Or should I? No, my priority is to preserve my deen. But if I happen to maybe be at a wedding and they were sitting at the wedding, and I happen to basically, hey, salamu alaikum, and basically talk to them, and perhaps maybe hold a conversation with one of them, and we're talking, and as we're talking, I'm reminding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or probably trying to bring in a relationship, at least to maybe convince her to come and watch a halaqah, or come to the masjid, and how fun it is, etc. Maybe try to put that input, try to put that influence, that good, positive influence. Well, good for you. But don't jeopardize and risk your deen thinking that, oh yeah, I'm basically with them, and I'm basically trying to do one thing, which is correct their vision, and I'm pretending to be with them and pretending to be a part of them, but I'm not really like that. I don't believe in what they're saying. No. Don't play that game on yourself, because at the end, you might risk your own faith. Okay, let's look at this one. الطبري had said, الطبري, a very important scholar in Tafseer, of course, his Tafseer, he died, I believe, 110 Hijriya, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, he said, look at this hadith. It's actually Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib that he had said. So it's not a hadith, it's an athar. لا تجالسوا أهل الخصومات فإنهم الذين يخوضون في آيات الله. Don't sit with the people, أهل الخصومات. أهل الخصومات are the people that, you know, some people have a personality where they're always just so argumentative. And those argumentative people, they are continuously just trying to, you know, support, personalize every single argument, and then they would defend their arguments, etc. And then without you realizing what they're doing is that they will take an idea here and there, and then it becomes something that is so personalized, and that they would start losing their tazkiyah, they would start losing their iman, they would start losing their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it's all about supporting themselves. It becomes such a personalized thing and not necessarily supporting the deen. Okay, so when you're looking at Ahl al-Khusumat, you're talking about the people that are continuously fighting, the people that are continuously making dramas. Okay, the people that are continuously making dramas are basically the people that you want to avoid, because then you're going to find yourself getting into that drama, and instead of having your objective as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your objective becomes your own ego or that person's ego. So Abu Ja'far Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib, he was basically saying, well, don't sit with them. And I want you to look at the word tujalisu, because tujalisu has some kind of an engagement. It's like, don't engage, don't sit with them, don't engage in those types of gatherings, because they will have an impact. They will have this influence on you without you realizing. The people of drama, the people of arguments, and they'll end up basically the ones to get into even interpreting the religion in a way that just supports their argument. They don't really care about what the truth says and what truth really is, as much as they care about supporting their stance, their vision, and what they want the truth to say. Okay, let's say Ibn al-Arabi. And he said, and this is an evidence that sitting with the people of Ahlil Munkar la tahil. He said, this is an evidence that sitting with the people of Ahlil Munkar, which basically in another copy, he said, it's Ahlil Kabair. Okay. And he said that that's basically in the book Ahkam al-Quran, which is Ibn al-Arabi's book. It basically said Ahlil Kabair. Who are those? He said that's an evidence that sitting with the people that commit major sin is not permissible. So if you know that these people commit major sins, then it's not permissible for you to take them as friends or as people that you would engage in conversations and take them as your place of advice, etc. No, these people you want to avoid them. They can't be your friends. Even if you were to hold a conversation, just a small conversation, maybe Assalamu alaikum, how's everything? Inshallah, everything good with you. And that's basically it. But don't make these people as your friends. You mujalasatuhum is basically not permissible. Ibn Khuwaizamandad. Who's Ibn Khuwaizamandad? One of the scholars from Iraq who is basically Maliki madhab. Notice, number one, Ibn al-Arabi is Maliki. Ibn Khuwaizamandad is also Maliki, but from Iraq. Okay, he said, quote, من خاض في آيات الله تركت مجالسته وهجر مؤمنا كان أو كافرا. If somebody is engaging / speaking negatively about the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whether we're speaking about ayat, whether we're speaking about principles, if somebody is basically speaking and engaging in this negative engagement with the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, we should leave sitting with them and even abandon them. Look at the word hujr. Hujr means to abandon. So that we should, yes, definitely abandon and take a serious stance, even if this person was a Muslim or whether they were a kafir. If this person is engaging in such conversations, and it's quite sad I had seen some people, they're part of a group, and then whenever, for example, Muslims are being mocked, they would give a smile because it's a Muslim that's being mocked. That's kufr right there. Okay. They're not being mocked for their own personality. They're being mocked because they're Muslim, or probably mocking niqabis, or mocking hijabis, or mocking probably the women, or maybe mocking the people that basically hold duxies and etc., and thinking that, oh, we're just mocking those people that go to duxies or this and this, and making it as if it's a funny thing to talk about. Duxi is basically the Somali word for the Quranic classes. Okay. And in that situation, whether we're mocking ayat Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether we're mocking the actual ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or things about Islamic history, or whether we're mocking the Muslims themselves, or mocking probably the ones that attend the masajid, or mocking Muslim women, or mocking the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then all of that is actually kufr. You should not be sitting with these people. You have to take a stance. Yes, abandon these types of conversations, abandon these types of people. Those are not people that are going to be increasing your iman, but they're going to have a negative effect on your iman. Okay, and he said, وَلِذَلِكَ مَنَعَ أَصْحَابُنَا الدُّخُولَ إِلَى أَرْضِ الْعَدُوِّ وَدُخُولَ كَنَائِسِهِمْ وَالْبَيْعِ ومجالسة الكفار وأهل البدع وألا تعتقد مودتهم ولا يسمع كلامهم ولا مناظرتهم. Whoa, that's a pretty straightforward quote. Let's see. What is he saying? He said, and that is why our friends, when he says منع, sorry, not منع, but منع أصحابنا, he's talking about the Malikis. Okay. He said, our friends, that is the Malikis, he said they had prohibited entering the land of the enemy, and even entering their churches, selling and buying, in other words, any transaction, or even sitting with the disbelievers or those that engage in innovation, or even thinking that we're supposed to hold, some kind of tolerance and kind of engagement, a personal engagement, or even listening to their words, or even debating with them. That's pretty straightforward. In other words, what? It's basically telling you that, there are certain stances that you have to take. And when he says sorry, why do I keep on saying منع أصحابنا الدخول إلى أرض العدو? That's a pretty straightforward statement, and telling us that the countries that have at least the majority are not Muslim, then in that situation, the Malikis would say you shouldn't be there. Be in a place that the majority is actually Muslim, because it's going to have an impact on you and your children. It's going to have an impact on your faith. It's going to have an impact on your ability to speak up about Islam. And he said, well, don't enter their churches, don't enter basically those conversations that you might engage in. And that's one thing that you would say, even when our children are going to Kafir universities, or those universities that mainly have disbelievers in them, they will have their influence on them. So here he says, mujalasat ahl kufar. Mujalasat ahl kufar is not just, we're just sitting down. Al-mujalasa, whether you're going to university, or whether you're basically sitting at a cafe, or whether you're basically going into the shop, etc., but that you have to take a certain stance, a certain distance as well, and to protect your own deen. Okay, and he said, وَقَدْ قَالَ أَهْلُ الْبِدَعِ لِأَبِي عِمْرَانَ النَّخَعِي. اسمع مني كلمة, just here. He said, one of the people, the innovators, they told Abu Imran al-Nakhai, he said, just hear this word from me. But then he just continued and just said, no, I don't even want to hear half a word. It's like, there are certain people that, I'm not interested. That's it. Keep your conversation to yourself. If you don't want to listen, you don't want to basically, you see the other person is wanting to have their influence, and they don't want to listen, they don't want to give you the ability to basically do that da'wah, then in that situation, lakum dinukum waliya din. I've got my religion, you've got your religion. That's the stance you want to take. I'm going to keep away. Okay, let's see Fudayl ibn Iyad. He said, whoever loves, look at this one, whoever loves a person of an innovation, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would let their good deeds basically not be of worthy. Or when we say أحبط الله عمله, that would actually mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their actions would keep on going down the hill. So that's what حبط الله. Their actions will keep on going down the hill. You're going to see a regression in their behavior, a regression in their thinking. They were one time holding a certain high position and a certain high level, and then they continued because they loved another person of a bid'ah or kufr or haram. Their involvement and their engagement is going to regress their faith little by little, and then it would take them أخرج النور الإسلام من قلبه. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically, as a result of what they had done, okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take out the light of Islam from their heart. وَمَنْ زَوَّجَ كَرِيمَتَهُ مِنْ مُبْتَدِعٍ فَقَدْ قَطَعَ رَحِمَهَا وَمَنْ جَلَسَ مع صاحب بدعة لم يعط الحكمة وإذا علم الله عز وجل من رجل أنه مبغض لصاحب بدعة رجوت أن يغفر الله له. Okay, let's see, where did he say that? Said Abu Nu'aym basically mentioned that in Al-Hilya, Hilyat al-Awliya. Okay, and Ibn al-Jawzi in Talbis Iblis. Yeah, I know Talbis Iblis, right? I'll explain a little bit about Talbis Iblis in just a bit. Okay, who's Al-Fudayl ibn Iyad? Al-Fudayl ibn Iyad, we talked about him before. He was actually a gangster. Can you believe it? He was a gangster. And then he goes over the houses to basically literally rob houses. And then he sees this woman doing قيام الليل. ألم يأن الذين آمنوا أن تخشع قلوبهم لذكر الله وما نزل من الحق ولا يكونوا كالذين أوتوا الكتاب من قبل. What happened? He was just hearing this woman that was reciting this ayah from Surah Al-Hadid. Isn't it about time for those that, for the believers to, ألم يأن الذين آمنوا أن تخشع, for their hearts to soften to the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that they would not be similar to the disbelievers of the people of the book. They had gotten the words, but then their hearts became harder and harder. وَلَا يَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِ. They heard the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they didn't take it into practice. And that's when he basically changed his stance and became a person to later seek ilm. He sought ilm and started seeking ilm at the age of almost 26. Okay, just keep that one in mind. Let's see, what did he say? He said, whoever loves a person of innovation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would regress their action and let the light of Islam out of their heart. And whoever would get his daughter married to a person that is mubtada', whether it's a Shia, whether it's probably a person that is engaging in bid'ah or probably doing something haram, then if he as a wali accepted his daughter to get married to that person, then in that situation you had done a crime in Islam, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had called those that would engage in not being the right decision makers and the right ones to make sure that their daughters are basically secure, safe, and making the right decisions. Then in that situation, you as a wali, by accepting your daughter to get married to the wrong person, then in that situation, قَطَعَ رَحِمَهَا. Then in that situation, you had just committed a major sin in not recognizing responsibility towards your own daughter. Okay, let's see. And whoever sits with a person of bid'ah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically they will not be given the wisdom. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, إذا علم الله عز وجل من رجل أنه مبغض لصاحب بدعة, but if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would know that a person would hate a person of bid'ah, then we would hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may forgive that person. Okay, why did I want to say about Talbis Iblis? You know what Talbis Iblis means? Talbis Iblis and Ibn al-Jawzi was probably one of the most important scholars for tazkiyah. Remember when we said tazkiyah and tarbiyah and adab and all of that? We were talking about that earlier. That's Ibn al-Jawzi right there. You want to talk about tazkiyah? Ibn al-Jawzi is number one. His book, Talbis Iblis, is, I don't know, 800 pages. I mean, that print, some of it was basically in 400 pages, making a smaller font, but it was translated, by the way. The book is translated into English. Okay. What does Talbis Iblis mean? Talbis means to wear something, to cover something. Iblis is Iblis, you know, that shaitan, you know. Okay. Now, that shaitan uses different methods to manipulate you. So when you're looking at talbis, we're talking about manipulation. Shaitan would manipulate you in different ways to basically do certain things, thinking of it as there's nothing wrong with it. So for example, okay, let's say your mother told you, for example, to do one specific thing, gave you the laptop. Okay, and told you, I want you to do one specific thing on the laptop. But then you were like, it's not haram. I'll just watch another documentary or I'll just watch another series. But mom told you to only do one specific thing. So Iblis comes in and says, you're not doing anything haram. She's just the one that's being strict. And then Iblis will come in and basically do that, just that. Well, that's not only on a daughter, but in Talbis Iblis, it was said that Ibn al-Jawzi in Talbis Iblis, that Iblis himself somehow had like a conversation with Ibn al-Jawzi and told him all his tricks. Of course, this is not real, okay? But you know, they just wanted to endorse the book and actually say that the methods that Ibn al-Jawzi had mentioned in the book were just tricks that you would never think of, okay? So in Talbis Iblis, he even talks about the different manipulation that Iblis would use on a person that studied fiqh, on a person that studied qada, on a person that studied basically to be a judge, on a husband, on a wife, and on a child, on a student, all of those. And he would say, this is the method that is being used, so be aware of it. And he'll go in all these techniques. He would be like, I never thought about that, man. How did you get there? How did you think of such a way that Iblis might actually use it on me? But that's Ibn al-Jawzi, because he would basically look into every technique that shaitan, he was aware of shaitan, and certainly aware of shaitan and the method that he uses. Let's go to another hadith. روى أبو عبد الله الحاكم عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من وقر صاحب بدعة فقد أعان على هدم الإسلام. Let's see. Whoever, what is التوقير? التوقير is to give respect, to give honor. Whoever gives honor to a person that engages in an innovation. When you say bid'ah, by the way, let me just explain an innovation. The opposite of innovation is sunnah. The opposite of innovation is sunnah. Okay. But if this is talking about an innovation, then certainly this would actually include, and even far worse, is a sin. So if you honor a person of sin, so for example, you know that person is a drug dealer, but he's got the money. But then what are we doing right there? We're in this gathering, and then this person that is known as a drug dealer, or a person of kafir, of kufar, or a person of this, but then, you know, I wanted to give them honor, to give myself endorsement. That is in itself is actually showing that you have a problem with your heart. You have a problem with your heart. If you know that person is kafir, you know that person is a sinner, you know that person takes pride in their sin, then in that situation, you have to support and honor Islam and not even get up for them. For example, it doesn't have to be getting up, but any form of honor. You honor a person for maybe, I don't know, honoring maybe Richard Dawkins, okay? Or, you know, all these, and the person's honoring them, and yeah, these people, and exactly like what Adnan Ibrahim had done. He honored a lot of the people of Kufr, but then when it came to a lot of the Muslim scholars, he would always mock them, put them down, etc. And then we had a wave of Muslims become ex-Muslims. Why? It was through that guy, Adnan Ibrahim, of course, who had basically always honored, whether it's Darwin or whether it's a lot of different Kafir figures, but when it came to Muslim figures, it was always mocking them. Why would they do that? It was mocking the Muslim figures. And we see this often, that we would say Muslims honoring il-Kuffar, but when it comes to Muslims, they're so hard on them. They're so hard, so always attacking the Muslims and always attacking the people that basically are active Muslims, etc. But when it comes to somebody that is a disbeliever, yeah, I'm trying to embrace their heart. I'm trying to show that Muslims are tolerant. So you're so tolerant with a kafir. But when it comes to a Muslim that you probably disagree maybe on the method, or probably disagree with them on a matter here and there, you're willing to basically slay their back, and you're willing to basically step on them in any way possible. But when it comes to a kafir, you want to show tolerance. That's a form of zandaqa. That's a form of zandaqa. Okay, let's look at this hadith. Whoever honors a person of bid'ah, then in that situation, they had supported in demolishing the religion of Islam. Okay. And he said, and al-Qurtubi wanted to basically say, and therefore, all those that had claimed that it was permissible to sit with those that basically oppose Islam, and that it was permissible if I'm basically not fully listening to it. So what does that mean? I'm in this conversation, or at least in this group, and when they mock Islam, I'm just not even listening to it. Yes, I am sitting in the group, but I'm just not even listening to it. I'm basically getting myself maybe busy with my phone and not even listening to what they're saying. But according to this hadith, that if you are there just adding at least a number to that group, then in that situation, you are supporting that. There was one time I was invited to join in a gathering because I forgot Moon Sung Young, I think his name was. Forgot what his name was, but sent me this personal invitation, okay, to basically come and join in the gathering. Okay. I wasn't really aware of who this person is. And then Allah Yajzil Khair, my professor, he said, don't go. I was actually thinking that maybe I can talk about Islam, present Islam there, and but my professor, Allah Yajzil Khair, he told me, don't go. And I said, why not? Maybe we could present Islam there. He said, this person believes that he's God. Just by you sitting there is basically, to him, is showing honor, and he's not going to give you the chance to speak. He's just going to say his words, and your presence is just going to give him honor and going to mislead the attendees. You would be misleading the attendees. And, subhanAllah, sometimes, alhamdulillah that my husband, many times he would be my mentor to sometimes, bring to my attention what I may not, my husband and before was my professors that were bringing to my attention where I should and where I shouldn't be going. And this is extremely important. Sometimes you need other mentors to help you recognize those areas that sometimes talbis iblis, without you realizing, can sometimes manipulate you into an idea. So listening to that advice of those that are around you is extremely important, whether professors or whether teacher or a good salih pious friend that has the ilm. But here's one thing. I circled this number 1 right there because here's what Shu'aib al-Arnaout basically said. Let's look at this quote. He said, لم نقف عليه عند الحاكم. Wait a minute. What he just said, Abu Abdullah al-Hakim. Who is that? So Abu Abdullah al-Hakim, he basically had combined a number of different hadith. It's almost maybe 15 huge volumes. Okay. Almost 15 huge volumes. He called it al-Mustadrak. What is al-Mustadrak? Al-Mustadrak actually means to add something onto something. Okay. So what did he want to do? He said, well, there are certain hadith that basically come from the same narrators as al-Bukhari and Muslim. And here are those set of hadith that I would like to annex to al-Bukhari and Muslim. Okay. And he called it al-Mustadrak ala Sahihain. Okay. So that's basically that scholar. Al-Hakim later, by the way, he was a great scholar, but at the end of his life, he basically had Alzheimer's and that affected him. But that is one thing I would like to say. Al-Qurtubi had claimed that this hadith, that is, was actually mentioned by Al-Hakim. But of course, Shu'aib al-Arnaout and those that worked on this copy, they said, well, we actually went over to the book al-Mustadrak and we didn't actually find it there. But here's where we found it in. We found it in Ibn Hibban fil Majruhin. What is al-Majruhin? Al-Majruhin is not talking about people that are wounded. No, this isn't talking about anybody wounded and somebody that was in a battle and they got one. No, absolutely not. Al-Majruh is basically a person that is not credible in their chain of narration, in their narration for a hadith, and therefore in the chain of narrations, those would be the names that you would find in the weak hadith, possibly in the fabricated hadith. Their names would be there. Okay. Ibn Adi fil Kamil, it's called al-Kamil fil Du'afa. Al-Kamil fil Du'afa is only in 6 volumes, so not too big. But anyhow, Ibn Adi also had combined a number of different basically narrators, and basically mentioned their hadith. And Ibn Adi would basically mention the scholars, or at least the narrators that said those hadith. And you could see Ibn al-Jawzi did something very similar. Al-Mawdu'at is basically the different fabricated hadith. He basically quoted that. So what is that telling us? Ibn al-Jawzi and certainly Ibn Hibban, they all said that this hadith is actually batilun mawdu'. Batil mawdu'. What is batil? Batil means that it does not contain any credibility in its chain of narration, and therefore it is fabricated, and there's no resource to prove that it goes back to the Prophet ﷺ. Okay. And therefore, he said, he was talking about al-Khushani, that chain, that narration basically has no resource whatsoever. Okay. Same thing with Daraqutni had also said matruk, in other words, not credible to being a chain of to being a narrator, etc. Then in the end, okay, Ibn al-Jawzi said, although, yes, it was attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, but that's actually not credible. That's not proven. But he said it was narrated as a quote to be mentioned of al-Fudayl ibn Iyad and those that were good. Okay, but in other words, righteous. So this quote failed to be a hadith. but did not fail to be a quote that was said by the righteous scholars to be as the tip to tell us, well, do not honor those that basically engage in haram or those that would engage in bid'ah, and that such an honor or such an endorsement will have its effect on your heart and its effect on how you would basically relate with the Muslims themselves or relate with Islam itself. So this is taking us all the way back to Islam, that if you're endorsing or if you're honoring those people that are basically opposing the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the impact is going to be on your heart and on your Islam. And we'll stop right there. Okay, we're going to stop right there. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. No one has any questions. Wow. Okay. You know what? I'm going to pause then the recording for those that prefer not being recorded.